Okay, guys, just a follow-on video from the protection orders yesterday. Again, to all newcomers, hope you're finding this information valuable. Please feel free to comment if it is valuable. To all the women who have recently been joining Children Need Both Parents, thank you for jumping on board. Yeah, we need more women to see men in this country fighting for their kids, and I hope just being on Children Need Both Parents has been a bit of an education for you. Again, women on the page, please feel free to comment, ask any questions. I'm here and I'm free. Today, I'm supposed to be following on with the protection orders, with the harassment order that I received. I don't know where I've misplaced it on my emails or a hard copy. I need to go and get the file from the court to actually get the actual harassment order. So today I'm just going to proceed with a rather lengthy video, if you don't mind, surrounding the Family Advocates report. To those abroad, the Family Advocate in South Africa is a state-run organ which is here to basically as the final approach between high conflict divorces or custody battles, as the mediator, as I understand it, between those parties. The Family Advocates Office is also established as a state organ to assist the South African magistrates and judges to a large extent in terms of making their decisions when it comes to high court trial dates or court matters pertaining to children. Again, if you disagree with my assessment, please feel free to comment. Let's just start with the advice section surrounding the Family Advocates report. To get to the Family Advocates Office, fathers, this is going to take you between a year and between 6 months and a year and a half to actually get an appointment to see the Family Advocate. During this process, you have very little recourse if you are being alienated from your child in terms of getting access to your child. So that's the first important thing to remember about getting a Family Advocate's appointment. The second thing is some people wait disastrously long times to get the actual Family Advocate's report, which then postpones how quickly you can get into court, because the courts mostly require the Family Advocate's report prior to getting into matters of divorce and custody. Again, if you disagree, I know I'm oversimplifying, but that's generally the case. The court is supposed to rely very heavily on the Family Advocate's report and in terms of custody, residency of children, etc., etc. However, and this is where the crux is, the Family Advocate's report is only a recommendation. So therefore, it actually holds no power over a parent who is alienating. So you might get a Family Advocate's report which supports regular contact with your child, but your ex-wife or your partner or the alienator does not have to adhere to the recommendations of the Family Advocate's report. So in essence, seeing the Family Advocate's office is, in my opinion, a futile exercise, because millions of taxpayers' money is going to pay an organ of state which is supposed to be there to mitigate and control high conflict divorces, especially in relation to access and custody of children. But the report, which is supposed to weigh heavily in on the decision of a judge in relation to these matters, is only a recommendation. So prior to getting to a judge, it's only a recommendation, which means that your ex-partner or the alienator doesn't have to listen to anything within the Family Advocate's report. Even when you get to court, and this is amazing, the Family Advocate's office, again, this huge bureaucracy that we all pay millions of taxpayers' money to, is there to set up really educated and experienced recommendations in terms of social workers and family advocates who have had many, many years of experience in family advocates law. Even the Family Advocate's report is only a recommendation within your court process. In other words, the judge or the magistrate still has the right to mitigate this report. So in my instance, for example, I see a High Court judge who has never looked at my file. He looks at my file for the first time when he meets me. He's supposed to apply the Family Advocate's report as part of his mitigating, and then decides to not read anything and not reply any Family Advocate's report anyway. So the Family Advocate's report is not only a recommendation to your partner, but it's also just a recommendation to the court. The judge, depending on how he feels that day, doesn't have to apply anything. If you go through the Family Advocate's report with me quickly, which I'll be sharing in the pictures below, the Family Advocate who did my report has over 21 years worth of experience. You have an appointment, you meet with him and a social worker. The social worker is present at that meeting, plus your ex-partner, which is what happens. In the beginning of his report, he says that I should have gradually phased in visitations with my son, but then later on the report, he says that I should be having visitations every day with my son between, I think, 11:30 and 3:30, and every alternating weekend. The report, again, in itself, with 21 years of experience and a social worker, is very conflicting if you read through it and take the time to do so. And also a good idea, so you can expect what you get, because this is apparently a particularly good report. Take into account that I have now gone through 2 protection orders, which has accused me of drug addiction, alcohol addiction, financial abuse, child abuse, physical abuse, wife battery, corrupting of police officers. Take into account the fact that I had 2 protection orders which accused me of all of this, plus an harassment order. All 3 of these were dismissed. The Family Advocate's report speaks to no risk assessment regarding myself. It speaks to no psychological evaluations. It speaks to no psychological reports being required. At no point in this document does it say that I'm a risk to my child. I just disagree with a couple of fundamental issues related to some statements within this Family Advocate's report. The crux of this Family Advocate's report, and I say this to demonstrate to the newcomers as to how quickly, or to people experiencing that, how quickly hope can disappear. When I got this Family Advocate's report, I was very, very sort of happy and impressed, and I was overjoyed, because to a large extent it makes sense. It talks, although he conflicts himself slightly, it talks to immediate contact to my son. It speaks of the fact that I'm not a threat or need a risk assessment or anything of that nature. I don't need to go for drug tests. I don't need to go for alcohol tests. I don't need to go for any of these things. None of this was adhered to or applied to. She disagreed. She said that the idea of my ex-wife, that is, the alienator, disagreed with the recommendation that my infant son should be dropped off at my residence with his caregiver, which is off this report, but I'm happy to show it to you on an email if required by anybody listening to this, whereby the caregiver was supposed to simply come to my home for a time period of a week to a week and a half to 2 weeks, to help sort of for me to get to know my son again. There was no speak of social workers. My ex-wife, or the alienator in this case, and you will read in this report, simply denied this recommendation because her caregiver to my child was worried, or she was worried, that she was going to be missing out on working hours. That's the only excuse that is needed for a Family Advocate's recommendation to not be applied. She didn't want the caregiver to miss out on working duties. So the caregiver's opinion, as you will see inside here, because the caregiver obviously agrees at this point that she doesn't want to miss out on wholesale duties, is reason enough for you not to see your child. It's reason enough for her to disregard the Family Advocate's report, and it's a reason enough for her to insist on social workers, because by this time the Family Advocate doesn't really have a choice, because it's only a recommendation. So she's coming back, her lawyer is coming back to the Family Advocate and saying, sorry guys, we're worried that the caregiver is going to miss out on working hours. And then in the beginning of the report, they try to paint a very sort of picture where the caregiver is nervous of me. They do an interview with the caregiver of my child after we have an interview with the Family Advocate and the social worker. And the social worker interviews the caregiver privately with my ex-wife without my presence, to assess how vulnerable she might feel in my presence. But yet the Family Advocate is aware of the fact that the previous caregiver allowed me to see my child, allowed me to WhatsApp and video call my child for a period of 3 to 4 months of employment. So they tried to paint a picture that I was not only a danger also to my ex-wife, but I was also a danger to the caregiver. I don't know, I'd be bludgeoning the caregiver whilst being with my child, or whatever. fantastical story was being brought up. So again, I demonstrate and show to you the fragility and the futility to a large extent of all of these organs. They make you jump this hoop, then to that hoop, and then to that hoop, and then to the next hoop, and nothing has to comply with anything. Zero has to comply with anything. And all through this time, this is also set up to continue to alienate your kids. Because if you go to the protection orders and what I shared previously about the time span with the protection orders, then the time span with the harassment order, then the time span to get to the family advocate's office, then the time span to get to the court. We're talking 2-3 years here. Most fathers have it unfortunate with the family advocate's report somehow comes back with the fact that they need psychological evaluations, etc., etc., etc. So quickly and shortly, my points of conflict with this report. Gradually, he says initially that should phase in contact back in the report, you'll see that it says between 11:30 and we need to move things along. The social worker should never have been allowed to interview my wife about matters concerning my son and her coming over to visit me. The third thing is the fragility of the report and the recommendation. The recommendation can be split to pieces simply by your ex-wife or the alienator saying that they're worried about the caregiver missing out on working hours, forget about your child's best interest or anything of that nature. That's what will win, and that's what will get you into supervised contact, which in this case happens. So now I've been told that the only way I can see my child, with showing that I'm not a risk to my child, that I'm in no way a danger at all to my child, I now need to pay social workers to see my child. If you work out the rates between 11:30 and 3:30 every day and every alternating weekend, if you work out those hours in terms of paying a social worker, you're looking at anywhere depending on 30 to 60,000 rand, paying their fuel, paying their expenses, etc. I contacted the two social workers as recommended in this report. I asked them how many criminal charges had been laid against them and how many complaints had been laid against at the SCCP, which is like a governing body for social workers, I believe. Both of these social workers, which were recommended because a caregiver was unable to assist, refused to take on my case or refused to answer my emails surrounding the charges and how many charges fathers have laid against them. So these two social workers refused to get on board with me. Anyway, so that's it in a nutshell. Any questions? I mean, I can go on this forever. I know this is a long video and I apologize, but the Family Advocate's report and what it actually means, which is almost worthless, something we all fight so hard for. I hope I've shown and demonstrated through sharing this exactly what it is that I'm on about. The next step from here, I will get hold of the harassment order, I'll share the harassment order, and then I'll proceed into sharing my High Court order, and then sort of link this all together, and you can see for yourself exactly where the injustice in all of this lies. Hope you enjoyed. Cheers, bye.